Hello and welcome to yet another weekly recap. We're here, we finally made it. I know it's been a while since I've made one of these videos. I think it's been about a month, and that's going to be normal for now. I only have time in my schedule to make one of these per month, and I know that y'all like these types of videos, so I'm gonna continue to strive to make one of these videos per month. So with that being said, this week's project isn't focused on a product, but more of a B-roll and post-processing type of shoot. So for this project, I wanted to focus on two things. The first one, I wanted to do whip pan transitions, and the second one, I wanted to do my own sound design or Foley work. So the subject for this shoot, I decided to do coffee, and more specifically, pour over coffee. So when I was doing my whip pan transitions on set, I had to map out how I wanted all of these shots to link together. And then when I was in post, I wanted to record every single action and add sound to those actions and mix them with the music. So when you're watching this video, you can hear all of the actions that we are seeing. So enough about that. Let's just watch the video and talk about it. We got the video up, let's watch. Okay, so right off the bat, I have a confession to make. I didn't come up with that bean toss and it slamming down on the cutting board. I saw that done somewhere and I was like, whoa, I've gotta try that out for myself, and I'm just gonna make a whole B-roll sequence of coffee around those two shots. The problem was, I didn't know how to get to that shot. I needed an establishing shot, and I had several ideas that just took way too much time. I really wanted to show that, hey, we're in the kitchen and we're making coffee, but they just took too much time to get to the point of this fast-paced video. So I just ended up having Chelsea set the Chemex down on the counter, then we can just whip up into the beans being tossed and slamming down. So it's simple, but it gets the point across, and sometimes less is more, and it just kind of moves the video forward. So I think it's a good shot, it's a good establishing shot, and we're into the video. Let's continue. Okay, so the way I did these whip pan transitions is I did everything in their own little idea or their own little sequence. And obviously the first one, I had Chelsea set the Chemex down, the camera whips up, catches the bean toss, lands, and then we're landing down on the cutting board. So those three shots are a single sequence or an idea. The next one is that drawer opening and then shutting, and as the camera comes down, we're kind of pulling away from that measuring cup, scooping the beans. The problem with this one is that drawer opening was really weak, and it's weak because of me. I'm not a robot. I can't move the camera consistently every single time, and I was standing on like a ladder looking down and trying to time everything up with Chelsea as she did everything. So I think it's the weakest shot of the entire video, but it moves so quickly and it goes into that nice looking bean shot. I think it's overlooked, and the sound that I added to that shot kind of helped move that shot along, but overall I still think it's the worst shot of the entire video, and that's just because I'm not a robot. I can't do that, but it works. We made it, we got through it, and let's just move on. Okay, so that wide shot of her pouring the coffee beans in, and then we kind of just push into inside the grinder as they're being grinded. And I had to rely on a post effect to do that because I'm shooting on prime lenses, so I can't change my focal length in the middle of the shoot. So I just had to shoot that wide and then move my camera and shoot the close-up. If I was shooting with zoom lenses, then I would have shot that wide shot, moved, and at the end, I would have zoomed in. And then for the grinding shot, I would have gotten close, and then at the beginning of the shot, I would have zoomed in. So then in post, I can take that camera zoom at the end and line it up with the camera zoom at the beginning, so then it looks like a zoom transition in camera. But since I was shooting on prime lenses, I didn't have that ability, so I just had to do it in post. And thankfully I have like 840 effects that I've downloaded from years ago, and this one was in there, so I was just like, oh, click, nice, done, we can move on, no problem. Okay, so two things here. Chelsea was really good at throwing that coffee filter into the Chemex. She did it several times. It was actually me that that kept messing up with my focal length because I can't follow the focus while that's happening. I have a set focus that I have to try to hit every single time. So it was really me that was messing up more. I would land and my camera was crooked, or I would land and it was out of focus. But she kept doing it perfect pretty much every single time, and I thought that was gonna take way more time. But we got like a handful of them. I think we got 7 of them, and I ended up choosing the best one. But it was kind of hard, but it didn't take nearly as much time as I thought it would. And finally, for this like dial turn for the stove, like those dials don't really make a whole lot of noise. They kind of just like click, and that's very boring. So I was like, what can I do to enhance this shot? It would literally be the only shot that doesn't have a sound effect. So I decided to just go on Epidemic Sound and find like a fire ignition start and use that sound effect and throw it in there. And at least that's something for the shot. And I think it actually kind of pulls it together and carries through to the kettle shot where the dial kind of turns. Okay, so again, the pour shot of the coffee going in, and then it kind of whips into the coffee being filtered. And I had to keep that in mind when I was doing everything. I had to make sure I whipped at the end of that shot, and then at the beginning of this shot, I had to whip in, catching everything in focus. So it's just a matter of me thinking ahead of time, knowing that I'm gonna edit these together in post, and I think they turned out really well. I think these two did, like that little sequence was a good little transition. So okay, and one little fun fact, the coffee swishing to the coffee pour shot, I actually had a cup shot in between there where she sets the cup down and then slides it across the cutting board, and as the camera moved, I was gonna have it whip into the coffee pour shot, but it just seemed really out of place to be swishing coffee, cut to a cup, and then cut back to the coffee. So I just decided to get rid of the whole cup shot and then just do a hard cut of the swish to the pour. Hard cuts are okay too. Not everything needs to be whip pan transitions. If I did that the entire time, then it would get very boring and like, oh, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. So it's good to have hard cuts in there too. So that's the video. Overall, I think it was a pretty strong piece, but obviously I have some learning points. So I have 3 learning points, and the first being the whip pan transitions. And I think I did a pretty good job planning out my whip pan transitions and how all the shots were gonna link together. I did a storyboard and I wrote out how everything kind of linked. If this shot was here, it went up and then it went over and everything like that. So I knew what I was doing on set on how everything was linking together and what way I was going to whip at the end of each shot. But the only thing that I didn't account for was the slow motion part of it. I shot everything at 60 frames per second, which is what I wanted to do. But what I didn't know was that there was gonna be a bunch of dead time from the point that I landed on the shot and to the point where I would whip up out of the shot. So for example, in real life, I was going from point A to point B to point C. But in slow motion, I went from point A to point B, and that looked good. But the difference from point B to point C was much longer. So I would land, and then I would sit there. And then I would whip up out of the shot. So it was just this weird stagnant dead time that in real life, I was just checking to make sure I got it, and then I would whip. In post, that time was elongated and it was really awkward. So the way I worked around that was I cut to the point right where I landed the shot, and then I would cut right before I did the whip up, and then I sped that footage up, and then when I whipped up, I would speed it up out of the shot. So that was just something that I never really accounted for, was the dead time from the point that I landed to the whip out of the shot. Learning point number 2 is the slow motion. I shot everything at 60 frames per second, but there were 2 shots in the entire video that I think I should have shot at 120 frames per second, and that's the bean toss and the filter toss. Now those are the 2 fastest moving shots in the entire piece, and I shot them at 60 frames per second, and I greatly regretted that when I got in post. When I got in post, I realized that the jar kind of looked a little bit wonky with some rolling shutter, and the same thing with the filter shot. So if I shot those at 120, there's a possibility that the jar could have been a little bit more clear and less wonky, and the same thing with the filter. So should I have shot those at 120? Yes. I didn't do it because I didn't want to shoot in 1080. I wanted to stay in 4K, so I have the ability to punch in and punch out in post, but the video was a 1080 video anyway, and I should have just shot those at 120 to get the clarity that I needed for those faster moving shots. Learning point number 3 is the pace of the footage and the music. Now, I had chosen a bunch of music before I did the shoot, and all these songs were pretty slow moving, and that's because I was shooting in slow motion. So I wanted the slow motion to work with the slow moving music. But what I didn't account for was those whip pan transitions. So when you do a whip pan transition, it kind of has to move quickly from shot to shot. So just that small little quick movement really changed the pace of the footage, so much so to where it didn't really work with the slow music that I had. So I had to go back to the drawing board and find a different song. And I spent hours listening to music until finally I had that magical moment where I found the right song at the right pace that matched the pace of the music, and then it was easy. I just dropped it in there, did all my sound effects, and it worked perfectly fine. But just knowing that the pace of the footage and the pace of the music need to be moving at the same rate, and I just never knew that those whip pan transitions would change it that much to where I had to go back to square one. So I lost hours of time trying to figure out a way to make that sound perfectly. So those are the 3 learning points for the video. Let's move on to the photo. So bam, there's the photo in its glory. And once again, I didn't have a good idea for the photo until I was doing the video shoot. And it turns out that I really liked the way the Chemex looked on camera. And I also knew that we had a cool backdrop in our apartment to where our sliding doors kind of have a green tint at night, and you can kind of see the lights behind them. So all I did is take my Chemex, put it on the counter at night, focused on the Chemex so I can get that nice bokeh in the background. I actually did brew some coffee so I can get that nice steam, and you'd have some coffee in the base layer of the Chemex. And that's the photo. It was pretty easy to color grade and get everything the way I liked it and just do fine tweaking. But that was the photo, pretty easy. I like taking pictures of coffee stuff. They just look so elegant, and it's so easy to get those nice rich tones when you're shooting coffee stuff. I just like it. So let's move on to the graphic design. Let's throw it on screen right there. And I had a hard time with this one. Every time I thought of a coffee graphic design, I wanted to see coffee in the design, you know, like that standard top-down view of the coffee mug and then like a long shadow going. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to stick to the norm of coffee design. So I just decided to do something a little bit away from the norm and do a vintage looking logo that just says coffee. We don't need to see coffee. We can read coffee in a cool vintagey type logo. So I went through and I downloaded a vintage font and kind of played around with that and tweaked it, and I think I ended up getting a pretty good result and a pretty good piece. So that about wraps up this week's weekly recap. Let me know in the comments below which one was your favorite. If you missed the coffee video, I'm gonna link it in the corner up there, and I'm gonna put it in the description below. As always, like and subscribe for more content like this. Skiddly bop that bell to be notified when I post another video. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one.